Alright, rockers, Turbo back here inside the asylum with you guys, and very rarely do I get to speak with someone that I listened to for many years, and in a way I look up to and admire, and in this case, it's not someone from the music world, but he does have a love for rock and metal. Some of you might remember him from NHL Live when the NHL Network first went on the air. Others, well, you know him from the Michael K. Show on ESPN Radio and the voice of the New York Rangers, none other than Don Greca. Don, how are you?
I'm doing terrific. How are you?
Doing well, my friend. Thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to do this. I greatly appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So, I gotta start, of course, with hockey. Before we talk a little music, I gotta start with hockey as the New York Rangers are getting ready for round one against Montreal. Some feel it's a good round. I'm a little hesitant because we don't have a great record against Montreal in their own home. What's your take going into the first round?
Well, I think this is the route you wanted to take. I think Pittsburgh or Columbus and certainly Washington, if it ever ended up being that, would be something you want to try to avoid. And if you are fortunate enough to get out of the first round, you didn't want to have to take on Washington in the second. So going through the Atlantic Division is probably the better route. But you're right, Montreal is kind of tough. Put Carey Price in the Bell Center, and he becomes almost impossible to beat. And the Canadians did win all three meetings this year, although one of them was a collapse in the third period by the Rangers. The other was a shootout loss in Madison Square Garden. So I think these are two very evenly matched teams, and if Hank can play to Hank's level, I don't think there's any reason to believe that the Rangers can't hang with Montreal. It's just going to be a matter of getting the right goal at the right time, but this just looks to me like a series that's destined to go a long, long way.
I agree there. I also love that it's once again an original six matchup in the playoffs. That doesn't happen as often as it used to, and I think that adds to the rivalry. And I've even heard that Montreal is already building up against Kreider from when he slid into Price 2 years ago during the conference final.
And that was a series that went the Rangers' way because Carey Price got hurt in the first game, and that's why Chris Kreider continues to get booed every time he's up in Montreal. And they met in the conference finals in '86 and in the first round in '92, and the Rangers came back from 2-0 down. So this is the 16th meeting between the two, but it always seems to be a big and compelling and fun series. But I think the Rangers definitely caught a break 3 years ago when it was Sikorsky that was between the pipes and not Carey Price. And Carey Price right now is playing at a tremendous level. So that's going to make this a very interesting series because it's two of the best goaltenders going up against each other. But unfortunately, if I had to pick who the better goaltender is right now, it's probably Price.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. I mean, I love Hank. I always will as a Ranger fan. But ever since the injury about a month ago, he came back and he's a little off, and he's been a little here and there all year. And you gotta wonder how many more runs does he have left in him. And he's not really a young guy either.
Oh, there's no question that this guy wants to win the Stanley Cup, Turbo. But the thing is that he's 35, and if you take a look at the history of the Stanley Cup, not too many goaltenders over the age of 35 have won. And if they did, it was because they were on great teams like Dominik Hasek and what he did playing for the Detroit Red Wings. So I think he realizes that this might be one of the last couple of stabs he has at it. And he's playing better now. I thought he played very well against Philadelphia. I thought he did what he could against Washington on Wednesday. They're going to get Ryan McDonough back, and hopefully the defense is going to be the kind of defense they hope that they can be to protect Hank. But I think he realizes that his opportunities are beginning to dwindle. And you could see in his face, and you can hear the way he talks, like how passionate he is about wanting to get that championship. And he realizes the window's closing. So you know he's worked at it. You know he's going to be focused. He always has the ability to bounce back after losses. And he's got at least one more game here, because I think he's going to rest possibly tomorrow, maybe the game on Sunday. But he'll get one more chance to kind of get into a groove in the playoffs. But I think he is going to be really focused to try to get this team on a run, because I think he realizes that he has to play great for this team to make any kind of a run.
Yeah, there are those out there, and I'm not one of those Ranger fans that think this. I'm a believer any year in the playoffs is a good year, but there are those out there that are going to say if we don't get out of the first round, it wasn't worth it, and it might be a rebuild time. Or do you think that might be sooner than later, or will there still be maybe one more or 2 more years before a rebuild?
Well, I think as long as Henrik Lundqvist is the starting goaltender of this team's going to try to win a Stanley Cup. And what was considered an off year for Henrik, he still won over 30 games. So I think as long as he's on this team, and he's under contract till 2021 now, whether he stays a Ranger for that length of time, we're going to have to wait and see. But as much as fans want Wanta, and as much as they want, bring the kids up, this is a team that's a perennial playoff team with a goaltender. They think they got a shot. And with Rick Nash making the money that he's making, and you got, at least for now, Dan Girardi under the contract he's under, Mark Stahl, the rebuild is going to have to wait until Hank's done. And as long as Hank is there, they're going to try to piece together a team. Sprinkling in youth. I mean, VC's had a chance to play. We've seen Hayes come up. We've seen Miller come up. We've seen Kreider come up. I mean, they've gotten younger, but the mission statement's going to be a cup as long as Hank's between the pipes.
And I also think going into the round, it'll be a good chance for both Zuccarello and Zibanejad to really step up, and more so for Zibanejad since he missed so much due to injury.
Well, Zibanejad has not been the same player since he broke his leg. Well, before he broke his leg, he was one of the reasons why this team is the best offensive team in hockey during the first couple of months of the season. And if he can get himself into a groove, that is going to be huge, especially at the center position. Zuccarello's been doing it all year. I'm just baffled for a guy his size, for the journey that he's been on, that he continues to be the best player. And the fact that he didn't play against Washington tells you that AV understands how important he is, and to get him some rest as well. Remember, they might go farther last year if not for what happened with his concussion and how much it hurt their run a couple of years ago when against Pittsburgh. So they have to feel that he's an important guy. I think he has delivered. The question is, will Zibanejad be able to deliver? And if he could be anything like he was in the first couple of months of the season, they'll be fine offensively.
Yeah, I think the key players are there, and I look at Zuccarello, and I think back to when he got signed, and I'm still as excited now. I've often looked at him as almost a combination of Theo Fleury and Marty St. Louis minus the temper that Theo Fleury had.
Right, exactly. I agree with you. I mean, guys that were diminutive in size, that played with a chip on their shoulders. And I think that both Fleury and St. Louis did that. And you have to. When you're a smaller guy and you're going to go muck in the corners and you're going to have to dance with guys that are a foot taller than you, 20, 30 pounds heavier than you, you're going to have that kind of chip on your shoulder. And you're right, he's handled it well. Fleury had his issues off the ice, but you're so right as far as he may not be as skilled as those players, but those players understood that they had to play at a certain level every single night. And that's the thing that really impresses me about him, is that every night he brings it. And you have to know that he probably struggles to do that every single night, considering how much bigger his opponents are. So I think he's got to be one of the fan favorites, and I think everybody would be shocked if he wasn't named the Stephen McDonald Extra Effort Award winner on Sunday when the Rangers play the Penguins.
I agree completely. Everyone loves him, and there's no reason not to love him. And I look forward to a long run and getting a nice beard going as we go into the warm weather. And hockey, of course, just one of the things I love, and I know you love, but I want to touch on something that my listeners are a regular fan of, and many might not be aware of, and that is your love of rock and metal. As a regular listener of the Michael K. Show, I know the guys are always busting your chops about Iron Maiden, and I know you were at last year's tour at the Garden, as was I, and I gotta ask, where did your love of rock and metal begin? And I gotta wonder why did you choose sports over maybe going into music radio?
Oh, it's a great couple of questions. I mean, metal was always a big taste. Where I grew up in Hawthorne, New Jersey, it seemed like everybody was a fan of Priest and Maiden, and you had to choose between one or the other. The way the classic rock fans argue on who's better, The Who or Led Zeppelin, was always Judas Priest or Iron Maiden, and kind of going back and forth. And in high school, it was the same thing. You know, going to an inner city high school, there was a lot of people that were into disco and dance music, and I just felt almost the same for my love of hockey, that metal was very underappreciated. Not a lot of radio stations played it. You had to work harder to get the information on the bands, as opposed to if you were a fan of other music. And it was the same with hockey. You got basketball, baseball, football. The information was easy to find. Hockey, you had to work harder for it. And it was the same with metal. So I always found that kind of correlation between the two. And then once I got to college and I started working at the radio station there and doing a metal show called Beast is Unleashed, I got introduced to a lot more thrash metal like Slayer and Merciful Fate. And so that really expanded my love of metal. And then I was able to afford to go to shows and see bands in concert, and it just really fell in love with that. And I interned at K-Rock, which had a sister station called Z-Rock. This is back in 1990, that played metal music, and Steve Apria was the PD, and he had come from SOU, which played metal in college at Seton Hall University. And I thought maybe I'd become a metal DJ. But through Maria Melito, who was a DJ at K-Rock at the time, she introduced me to a person by the name of Pete Walker, who got me in the sports phone. And it just, that my love of sports, and then that trail just seemed to blaze more in that direction than the metal direction. But when I was going to college, I thought there was as good a chance of being a DJ than there was sports. But unfortunately, as you probably know, over the last 20 years, the DJ's kind of gone the way of the dinosaur, and it's not the same as it was when we were growing up. So I probably made the right decision, because I think the job opportunities were better in sports than they were in music.
That is very, very true. I mean, you bring up a really great point there in the world of DJs. Yeah, and you're someone that's been lucky enough to be part of the industry for 20 years plus. And yeah, I gotta wonder, what's your take on where we're going with radio? Right now you've got FM and satellite and internet like myself, and podcasting are we getting to a point of oversaturation or burnout, or what's your take?
Well, I think that what we're seeing, at least from the sports radio side of things, is that it's very difficult to service the audience. It's kind of like top 40, right? Like back in the day, you'd listen to music and you'd wait for your favorite song to come on, and you had no other choice. You had to wait. If you're in your car and there was a popular song, you'd wait for that song to come on, and you'd listen for the length of your time in the car or however long you were at home, and you had to wait. And just as those stations were affected by people, getting an iPod or CDs or going to satellite radio where it was commercial free, they don't have to wait for their favorite song anymore. And now what's happening with our business is that if you're a hockey fan, you don't have to wait for the Michael Kay show or Mike Francesa to talk hockey. You can go to a hockey station on satellite radio where you can listen to your favorite hockey podcast. It's become very specialized now, where it's hard to just have variety. It's people want what they want. They're an NBA fan, they're going to go find NBA. They're a baseball fan, they're going to go find baseball. So what the challenge is for us is, since we can't always know exactly what the listener wants at that particular moment, is to be versatile but also be entertaining. That I can entertain you talking about something that you necessarily aren't a big fan of. That's what we have to do. So I think what you're seeing is most of the future. If I had to look at radio 10 years from now, 20 years from now, people will be listening on their phones. They'll be streaming on the internet. The radio is probably going to become obsolete. And because of listening through the computer, you can now go to, I want to listen to Turbo's podcast, or I want to listen to Don's hockey podcast. So that's where I think it's going, specialization, where people can a la carte pick and choose what they want to listen to. And I think that's the challenge of the overall sports stations, to have to live through what the listener wants. And it's going to be a difficult trek for that radio show to be able to survive.
Now, are you like me? I mean, I'm 37 and I'm still old school. I prefer a CD over a download, and I prefer satellite or FM radio, and even though I'm an internet radio guy. But when you go for new music, or you're looking to see what Iron Maiden or Priest are up to, where do you turn? Have you gone full on modern day streaming, or are you a mix?
Well, I think social media is where I get it now, right? I mean, you follow those bands on Twitter and Facebook, and you find out all the information from them. I know that Black Sabbath is a band that I love, and I follow them on Twitter, so any new releases, I find that out. So that's where, I mean, I'm old school like you. I think a song on the radio sounds better than it does on my CD or my iPod. But now when you want information, you get it straight from the horse's mouth, right? There used to be fanzines back in the day, or a newsletter from a fan club that you might have belonged to. But now it's totally just going on Twitter, going on Facebook, and following what those bands are doing right away.
It's a whole new way of doing it, and maybe it works out better for the fans. And I know you're busy, Don, but I do want to ask regarding the bands. I know you love the classic stuff and of Sabbath and Priest and Maiden. Have you gotten into any of the newer bands, or have you kind of cut off after a certain year with rock and metal?
You know what's interesting about metal is that I've been introduced to some new bands, but I always find myself gravitating back to the old school ones, and that's a bad job out of me. I mean, I need to expand my horizons a little bit more. I know friends of mine introduced me to a band called Sword and bands like that, but I just find myself kind of just living into the old school moments. And even sometimes, like, I'm very late to the party when it comes to new music from the old bands, like the new Slayer. I know they're on tour, and then the new Maiden album that comes out. I still find myself gravitating towards the old school stuff. I need to expand my horizons a little bit more, but sometimes I just get too old school for my own good.
Well, sometimes you just can't help it, especially when they are classics. But I tell you what, I'll do my best to send you a tweet every now and again of a band maybe you should check out, and maybe I'll help bring you along to some of the newer bands that are making noise in rock and metal.
Well, if you ever find something, definitely send it along to me. I'll give it a listen.
Well, I always do on a regular basis, so I will definitely do that. Don, I thank you for taking the time out to speak with me here inside the asylum and talk some hockey and music and radio. And before I let you go, as always, I always ask my guests to pick out a song for my listeners to hear, maybe a favorite of yours. So what would you pick out for everyone to hear?
Well, since we've talked so much about Maiden, what about a little Hallowed Be Thy Name off of The Number of the Beast?
Perfect idea, especially with Iron Maiden going out on tour this summer. I'll be at the Barclay Center for that one. I don't know if you have it on your schedule.
No, it's going to be tough to get out there, but have a good time, buddy.
I will definitely. Everyone right now, a little Iron Maiden. Hallowed be thy name.